Critics Podcast.
Armchair Critics Podcast.
Members of the notorious Armchair Critics Podcast have been arrested for having too many opinions.
Armchair Critics Podcast!
All right, everybody, welcome to the very first episode of Armchair Critics. I'm your host, Ethan Engert.
And I'm your other host, Aidan Howe.
And today, for our very first episode, we are covering Michael Mann's 1995 hit, Heat. Aidan, I gotta be honest, I was so excited to rewatch this movie. I literally dreamed the night before. I couldn't wait. I just dreamed I was rewatching the movie.
It's that good.
It's that good. Well, this was my second time watching the film, but Aidan, it was your first. Tell us, what do you think of Heat?
All right, I'm going to be honest, man. I loved this film. I had no idea if I was going to like it or not going into it, but it was... The way I'm going to say it is it's simultaneously exactly what I expected and simultaneously exactly not what I expected. You know?
Yeah.
How can I verbalize what I'm saying? It's a very movie-ish movie. It like balances surrealism and realism very, very interestingly in the filmmaking and stuff. Like the script writing and the way it's filmed, at times it almost felt like an art house film in some of the scenes. But also you've just got these like incredible, super gritty, like tightly choreographed gunfights that just like draw you right in and just like punch you in the gut with every single shot. Just like the elevated sound design helps with that a lot, you know. But I think that goes into every factor of the film, really. Like what am I looking for? The script writing. Michael Mann like found actual kind of super criminals, I guess, you know, like De Niro's character, and he socialized with them, and he had Pacino and De Niro, and I think Val Kilmer and a few other cast members come with him to this one club he knew of, which he refused to release the names to the public for obvious reasons, where cops and criminals would socialize with each other. And he had Pacino eat dinner with a bunch of cops, and he had De Niro eat dinner with a bunch of criminals, so they could just get a sense for how these people talked.
Absolutely.
You know? So it's very realistic in that regard. But then, you know, you've also got this like interesting use of focus throughout the cinematography, and you've got this like the one shot that really sticks out to me. So this is a spoiler discussion, right? We're just
absolutely.
Spoilers throughout.
Absolutely.
Yes. So don't listen if you haven't watched Heat. Sorry.
And if you haven't, go watch Heat.
Yeah. Please do. There's the one scene late in the movie where like De Niro's, man, what's this character's name? Vince,
Neil
right?
McCauley.
No, Neil. Yeah. Pacino's Vince. So Neil is chasing Edie, right?
Yep.
And it's like really early in the morning. The sun is just starting to rise. And he like lands on top of her in the meadow, right? Yeah. And it's just like you can see them struggling in the background, but all the camera focuses on is like this just like wheat blowing in the wind. And it feels sort of dreamlike. That's helped a lot by the score throughout, which is very like kind of ambient and droning, you know?
Yeah.
You know, it's like it's almost relaxing for intense crime film, you know?
Yeah.
It's crazy. So I'd say that's honestly, it's just fantastically directed. Absolutely. I'd say that's my biggest impression. That's what it left me with, is just how fantastically every aspect of it comes together to create an experience which, you know, kind of slightly reminds you of a few other movies, but it's in essence, it's unlike any other movie I've ever seen.
That's a great way to put it. I got a lot to say about that. My own breakdown, I say Heat is my ultimate example of balancing style and substance. Few films do as much with their runtime as Heat does, and fewer still so as expertly. Michael Mann shows us the full depth of many genres and ideas while being backed by one of the most entertaining casts to watch, for sure. And when all this is punctuated with an exclamation point and such a thematically, emotionally, and sensually strong finale, Heat finds a very special place in my heart, as well as my top 5 list. You mentioned earlier the score, and I completely forgot about it after watching it the first time. And when I watched it again, I was delighted to see. This is one of the most unique soundtracks I've ever seen in a film. There's like
absolutely.
There's that one scene, the first time De Niro takes Edie to like his balcony, and they're looking out over LA, and it's just like this sweet, romantic electric guitar and like drum machine backing track. And throughout the whole film, some of the most intense scenes are scored by this very like percussive, like these tight toms, just drums and nothing else. It was awesome. I actually wrote.
It's absolutely amazing.
Yeah, I wrote. It reminds me a lot of Miami Vice, Michael Mann's first introduction to Hollywood. He produced Miami Vice. This was very reminiscent of that.
I gotta watch Miami Vice. I keep hearing how great it is.
I almost did immediately after this.
Can't blame you. I think, yeah. So one thing I also realized that I didn't know is that a bunch of songs by Moby, who's an artist I like, although I haven't listened to as much stuff as I'd like to, are worked into the soundtrack, and they blend very seamlessly with the nature of the score itself. The score reminded me a bit of Hans Zimmer at times, particularly his work on like the Dark Knight trilogy, which obviously was very inspired by Heat. And that sort of got me thinking about a greater thing, which is you can tell just by watching it how intensely influential this movie is. Yeah. There are so many movies that have tried to do what this film has done and failed because they've done it way worse. And it's also, I feel like, influenced video games a lot, like Grand Theft Auto. Absolutely. Or, is it Payday? That's that one really heist focused game. Yeah. All of that is very inspired by Heat, but nothing has come close to achieving it. It takes these trends that are frequently annoying in action movies, but it kind of did them first and it did them the best. So like the color palette, it's very steely. There's a lot of gray and blue. There's not a lot of like natural flesh tones or warm tones. When there are warm tones, they tend to stick out a lot, but they're generally only really used for emphasis. Like in that one shot I mentioned where De Niro's on top of Edie and you can just see kind of the orange sky behind them. Yeah. But for the most part, it's very, very gray. And, you've got all these action movies, particularly in like the 2000s. You had all these bad action movies coming out every other week, which had that super gray color palette. And it just looks like crap because, these movies aren't directed by Michael Mann. Yeah, that's the thing. But you can see where they got it from, and you can see why people liked it so much. Fast editing and shaky cam, too, very common throughout the 2000s. I don't think Heat indulges in very much shaky cam. It tends to be very clean, especially during action sequences. But it does periodically use it for impact, and you can definitely see, disposable action director 15 watching this in 2004 and being like, oh, I should put that in my movie because Michael Mann put it in Heat and that is a good film. Yeah. You bring up a good point. It's it comes from a lot of these roots in Hollywood and created some more roots. It's one of the very first things that I thought of on this rewatch was this is part action movie. It is not completely action movie. And that's, I'd say, in my opinion, first betrayed by the pacing. The very first thing you see is this, very bombastic heist that begins with like this semi-truck, or actually it's a tow truck, this big tow truck ramming into a bank truck, and then you get the shot of the explosion wiping out, all the back windows of the cars. And awesome stuff. But this takes, 15 minutes to develop. And at the very beginning, you don't even know where we're going. It's slow. It's indulgent. And you mentioned camera work as well. Another thing that, the action is focused around the people. And when the action is gone, it is all about people. This is a drama before an action piece. And you can see it in the shots are almost claustrophobic in the way that a lot of telephoto use and many close-ups as well. And you have this shallow focus, which is just the best way to shoot LA, especially LA at night with all the lights. It's gorgeous, but it just gorgeous. Yeah, it visually enhances the idea that this is a character piece. it really accurately depicts how it feels to be in a city at night. And I think the crucial part of that is how it feels, you know, because like you said, it is completely focused on the characters and how they perceive the world.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting to compare this to other 90s action films. It doesn't really feel like a 90s action movie. Although it also doesn't feel, I'd say, like a 2000s film or a 2010s film. It feels sort of timeless.
Absolutely.
You know? And like, so one film that I thought of periodically while I was watching this, and this is a good film. I'm going to be talking trash about it for the next few minutes, but it's a really good film and people should go watch it. Face Off. Face Off and Heat have sort of a similar basic setup. You know, you've got this upright good guy, family man, although in Heat it's a bit more nuanced than that. And then you've got this sort of terrorist criminal villain that he's chasing it down. And they're kind of like two souls who are kind of the two sides of the same coin, but they sort of they're enemies. And you know, it finally ends with the cop killing the robber, basically. Yeah, spoiler for Face Off. Sorry. Go watch Face Off though. But Face Off is a film focused entirely on the action and not on the characters. It's a film focused on carnage, you know, and on just stuff that John Woo thinks looks cool. You know, you got like the doves flying around in the church in the finale. You got like everything blowing up. You got speedboats running over things. He doesn't have a lot of big explosions. It's got fantastic action scenes without big explosions, but that's because, like you said, it's focused on the characters, on their reaction to the action, and on how they are involved in it. Yeah. So like when Val Kilmer gets shot, that's a big deal. It focuses in on him. It shows us how De Niro reacts to it, how Pacino reacts to it, how all the other characters react to it. And it contextualizes the action scene by even showing us the reactions of characters who are not involved in the action in that one heist scene, you know? It shows us what's the driver's name again? The fry cook?
I don't know. He's the Allstate guy in my mind.
Yeah, well, it shows us his girlfriend, you know, who's just at a bar. And I'm pretty sure it cuts to this like right after the action scene. It shows her just like finding out about his death and just being like utterly devastated.
Yeah.
Or it shows Pacino and De Niro's wives' reactions to it later in the movie. It's like you said, it's a character piece. It's a drama which takes on elements of an action film in order to really explore the lifestyle of these characters and really explore what kind of impact violence has on people.
Yeah, that's a great point. I've done some reading and research on action in film specifically, and the two things that come to mind in accordance to this film are it's imperative to, even if you are creating a purely action film that is centered around action, it is imperative that the action means something. And boy, does it mean something in Heat. You know, everything it goes beyond even furthering the plot. You know, you have that huge the gunfight in the middle of downtown LA. Insane. I don't know. I might even be able to say it is objectively the greatest shootout in cinema history. At the very least, my favorite. It's
definitely up there.
Yeah, but this is the third act turn. More than that, this is the beginning of our central characters, Vincent Hanna, played by Al Pacino, and Neil McCauley, played by Robert De Niro, beginning to unravel. And it is shown through action, which is the other thing that I have learned about. You know, you see these action scenes as a great way to express the minds of the characters. And you can see something that I would love to talk about in a moment. But Al Pacino and Robert De Niro, their characters control their emotions. They do it differently. But in these moments of action, you get a glimpse into what they're really thinking, what they're feeling, where their priorities lie. And it is a great I think of the moment where the fight is taken to outside this grocery store, and there are casualties. And it's partially
Yeah.
because Pacino is more interested, or I should say Vincent Hanna is more interested in taking down Neil McCauley than, a fair, saving these civilians. There's even the scene taken to its, fullest extent later where the one guy, Mike, grabs a lost little girl in the middle of LA and he's using her as this body shield, and Vincent Hanna has no problem taking Mike down even though he's holding a little girl.
He does not hesitate. And although you do have to mention though how he immediately runs over, checks the little girl's okay,
Absolutely.
And gets her out of danger. But he still takes the shot.
Yes.
I'm pretty sure that in a situation like that, cops are not supposed to shoot.
Absolutely not.
Doesn't matter how good of a shot you are. Yeah, that's absolutely right. And I think what that basically comes down to is the movie is telling us the entire time Vincent and Neil are not that different. And in many ways, Vincent, I'm not going to say in all ways, but in some ways, Vincent is a worse person than Neil. He's sort of discompassionate a lot of the time. He's a complete wreck, but he's still sympathetic. And the same goes for Neil, who, initially seems just like a basic cop versus bad guy setup. And, you look at Neil and you think, okay, this guy's our antagonist. Mm-hmm. I'd say they're dual protagonists. And Absolutely. I'd say both of them basically have simultaneous heroes' journeys throughout the film, which intersect with each other. And one of them ends reasonably well, and one of them ends tragically.
Yeah. I have to admit, the first time I watched Heat, I can say I watched it objectively wrong. You can argue that you're supposed to root for both of them, and there's some internal conflict in yourself because you say, if one guy wins, the other has to lose. There's no way. And I decided for whatever reason, Neil McCauley was cooler, and I just decided to root for him.
It's the beard.
Yes. But the thing is, it's you can choose. These are two very lovable characters. And on second watch, I watched it correctly. And I'm still torn up to see Neil McCauley get shot at the end. But I would be at least equally torn up to see it be Vincent Hanna. You're right. These are guys who have hero arcs. They are dual protagonists. And it's very interesting to see. That's where I think this film gets elevated even beyond, just other, action character pieces. It's in the fact that they are the same person. And Michael Mann draws this out in interesting ways, not just in terms of the narrative, but visually. I can think of one scene where there are a lot of subplots throughout the film, but two culminate at the same time, where Vincent Hanna is taking down an informant in his house, and in that altercation, he throws him through his sliding glass doors onto the balcony. And reverse is the scene where Neil McCauley is going after this guy who screwed him over earlier in the film, and he does the opposite. Yes, Van Sant. He sneaks up from the balcony and throws a chair through the glass sliding doors to get inside. It's a thing Michael Mann elevates this. This is nothing new. It's just better.
Parallels, yeah.
Yep.
Absolutely. I think a tremendous amount of the friction in the relationship between the two characters is just due to the performances. I'm not going to say Heat is like a bare script, because it's definitely not. But you do have a lot of sort of quiet moments, or just like moments where you've got to see parallels between the two characters, and you've got to see sort of emotion expressed through their faces, And it doesn't help that, one of them is an experienced criminal and the other is a cop, two sort of character archetypes who are kind of, typically stoic.
Yep.
But De Niro and Pacino are both fantastic at portraying these characters. I'd say De Niro, I liked his performance a little bit better than Pacino, but they were both fantastic. Yeah. Like Neil, the way you can see, he starts the film just completely cold and like shut off from people, you know? He expresses, the only emotion he expresses at all is rage, and that's when he's like beating up the knucklehead who nearly messed up the heist. What's the guy's, Waingro? Waingro, is that it?
Yep.
Yeah. So when he's beating up Waingro, that's like the first emotion we've seen from him other than like planning, you know? But as the movie goes on and as things start to unravel for him, especially in the final act, you can just see like his expressions soften more, especially in his scenes with Edie. And he's finally starts to wear his heart on his sleeve by the finale, and just like the absolutely broken expression at that set piece at the end when he like looks over at Edie and he realizes he'll like never be able to see her again is perfect. Just perfect acting. Yeah. Pacino too, he definitely hams it up for fun, but I realize he only really does that in the scene where he's trying to intimidate people. So it makes sense for him to be over the top at those times.
That's a good point.
The rest of the time, he's able to be very human. And you feel like you're actually watching this guy, you know? And he's obviously very world weary and cynical in a lot of ways, but you still see genuine emotion from him, especially in the scene where, you know, his stepdaughter attempts suicide. Yeah. Like you can see he's super, super tired. He comes home and then he just finds this, and you can see he's holding it together for his wife's sake, for his daughter's sake. But you can see like this guy's cracking apart at the seams. He's barely holding it together, you know. Absolutely. And that comes almost entirely through just body language and line delivery.
Yeah. It's great to bring up these two guys. Now I was not alive in the 90s, but I know in the 90s, you know, this was a huge thing. This was the very first time Al Pacino and Robert De Niro, you know, they were getting very similar roles, but this was the first time they had ever been in a film delivering dialogue together. They had been in The Godfather Part 3, but they didn't have any scenes together. Part 2, yes.
Yeah.
And it was such a huge phenomenon. And I know the big question was, is it De Niro or is it Pacino? Who is better? It's funny you say De Niro. Pacino gives in one of my top 3 favorite performances of all time. It's tough for me to say who's better. I think De Niro is better in this film, but I just enjoy watching Pacino so much. He's crazy.
He's so charismatic. He's perfect as the character. He's like consistently fun to watch. Absolutely. You're just rooting for this guy from the get-go.
Yeah. One note I wrote down literally just says Pacino is actually insane. He goes so hard. But yeah,
he's having fun. You can watch him. Like De Niro is someone who always throws himself into his roles and always like perfectly expresses whatever the character is feeling. And Pacino has some performances like that. Michael Corleone, especially his character who comes to mind, is just like every twitch, every tick, every eye movement is just perfectly calculated for what the character's emotional state is. But a lot of the time, and this especially struck me watching this and The Irishman, Pacino just like unrolls and has fun. He's having a blast just acting. He loves his job, and it really comes through.
Yeah, and I think it has to have been, you know, the thought of Michael Mann that this is just the way that Pacino and De Niro are. Pacino is great because he's over the top. De Niro is great because he's laid back and reserved. And you know, these two characters are the same in the same way that, you know, black and white is the same. You know, they're opposites, but they do the same things. And I brought up the thing with emotion earlier. They suppress their emotions differently, or rather handle them. Mm-hmm. De Niro gives a more reserved performance because he's a character who, like you said, you never see his emotions. Pacino, on the other hand, gives a very high-octane, 11 out of 10 performance. And his character displays lots of emotions, but no deep ones. He is shouting and angry, but you never see him really torn up until both of them have, at the same time, this, dark night of the soul moment where they can progress no further the way that they have been. You mentioned Vincent Hanna sees his stepdaughter attempt suicide, and Neil McCauley's love interest, Edie, she finds out what he does for a living, and she tries to run away. And from then on, they stop. The characters themselves stop acting, and you see it's on their faces what they're thinking, what they're feeling more often. And honestly, the third act has my favorite moments from De Niro, because he shows his emotions on his face more.
Yeah, absolutely. And in every scene, you can see he's just become more and more like furious, and he's unwinding. And just like every scene he's in the third act, really, you can absolutely see that. Like when he finds Trejo and he's like talking to him and he decides to put him out of his misery, you can see this like conflict and this kind of sadness and regret on his face as he pulls out the gun and puts his friend out of his misery. You can, in the scene where he kills Waingro, just like pure rage contorts his face in a way you haven't seen previously in the movie from like any character, really. But just like complete, genuine fury, just like just finally coming out and being unleashed upon the scumbag who betrayed him.
Yeah, they do a great job making you hate Waingro.
Yeah,
he just like,
I think
if you don't know where it's going at first, I don't remember. I'm not going to speak for you, but I might have thought like they're spending a lot of time on this guy, and at the end he is very important. He's the reason that Macaulay gets caught and eventually killed. But throughout the whole film, every scene he's in, it's just like he's executing people or just the most racist neo-Nazi, and you just, all right, get this guy out of here. I'm ready for him to die. And when Macaulay takes him out, you're just like, finally, I don't care what the repercussions are. I'm glad this guy's out of the film.
That was initially sort of a nitpick for me, you've got that one scene where he kills the girl, he like bashes her head in, and then Vince finds her body, and I'm thinking like, where is this going? Like, what is this subplot? Yeah. Like this guy clearly isn't like a protagonist in the way Pacino and De Niro, and you could even argue Val Kilmer's character is. Yep. He's like, why are we spending so much time on this guy? And I will say the serial killer aspect of his character isn't really revisited. It's basically just to make you hate him.
Yeah.
But, I mean, hey, it works. I mean, it's really satisfying to watch him get shot.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's one thing that has always been very interesting to me, thinking about Heat, the pacing and just the structure of the narrative. It's it kind of straddles these two eras of storytelling in cinema. I think of this old, specifically 70s and 90s. I think Scorsese, where these films start, go, and stop. Things happen. There are themes. There's a plot. But you can compare that to more of this style that has developed more in the 21st century, where films are more poignant. You have these, Blake Snyder's beat sheet is more utilized in these films, and Heat, coming in 95, is kind of in between the two, where you have lots of, I wouldn't say extraneous moments, but it's kind of filler, always for a purpose and always enjoyable. But if this film came out in the 21st century, there'd be a lot shaved off, and vice versa. It is more direct than some of the films of this older generation. And you
Absolutely.
can't follow this very, succinct, save the cat type narrative structure.
Yeah, absolutely. And comparing it to something like Goodfellas, like you said, that whole sort of 70s, 90s Scorsese is interesting because Goodfellas is a very, I guess, joyful film. It's a very like vibrant and almost goofy, often comedic film until about the last 20 minutes where it finally cracks down. It's like, all right, you're finally going to see the consequences of what this entire movie has been leading up to.
Yeah.
Whereas Heat, like you said, sort of wears the consequences more on its sleeve, even in just the way its characters are portrayed. I mean, for a moment, compare Henry Hill to Vince. Henry Hill, when you first see him, and for like pretty much all of the movie until the final act, he's dressed fantastically. He's got carefully combed hair. He's got generally a wide grin on his face or a cigarette in his mouth.
Yeah.
He's having a good time. He looks young. He looks handsome. He's having a good time. And then Vince is just this super tired looking Pacino. He seems absolutely wrecked. He's constantly like chewing on something and wandering around in like kind of baggy clothes.
Yeah.
And just kind of like staring at people with his weird piercing eyes. So one of them is a character who's kind of high on life, and the other one is a character who's sort of seen the worst life has to offer.
Yeah.
And they're basically, one of them is sort of pretending to be stoic, Henry Hill, and the other is kind of actually stoic because he's seen so much insane stuff. It's definitely a very interesting contrast. One thing that Vince and Neil's relationship reminded me of, and something that I feel like you honestly don't see that much in fiction anymore, in movies especially, is sort of the honorable relationship between the hero and villain.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, yeah, we can't argue that they are two simultaneous protagonists, and I do think they are in many ways, but at its most basic, it's a cop versus a robber. That's what the basic story is. Mm-hmm. It's almost like old Sherlock Holmes or something. You've got Holmes and Moriarty, who are these two insanely smart men, these two just extremely powerful minds who just like get away with so much that they respect each other.
Yeah.
Holmes and Moriarty respect each other, and in that one story, they end up dying simultaneously, grappling, like going over a waterfall.
Yep.
Or I don't know, kind of a different example, and one that's become less the case in recent years, but Batman and Joker, especially in the old comics, they sort of respected each other more. It's two people respecting each other. Part of what makes Heat great, I heard this differently expressed about a different movie. I can't remember what it was, but so many movies just rely on people being like bad at what they do to drive the plot, or bad at their jobs, that it can frequently become frustrating. But Heat is the opposite of that, because you've got a great cop tracking down a great criminal.
Yeah.
They're both fantastic at what they do, and that's what's satisfying about it, is they're operating at such a high level that like the tension is amplified. But at the same time, Michael Mann is able to keep it simplistic enough and to express it in such intelligent ways that even though they're operating at such high levels, you can always tell with complete clarity what's going on and what they're doing.
Yeah. And that brings about the internal conflict of the film, and just another reason that this is more than just, your classic action drama, because the conflict is not external really at all. Like you said, they are very competent, and the big action set pieces are there for our entertainment. But what's really happening, the conflict, is not that physical confrontation.
Yeah.
It is within the minds of these two characters. And you see it. If these guys were able to get their lives together, prioritize, and just figure out what matters to them most, there would be no film. These guys would be living happy
absolutely.
lives. De Niro would be kicking back in New Zealand with Edie. But it's this thing, they each are given a moment throughout the whole film, they never put their heads down and decide what is my life going to be until they each, like I said, they have that dark night of the soul moment, and afterward, Vince gets the page that there's something going down, and Macaulay is at Wangro's hotel, and his wife tells him go. He cannot. He chooses to live the life of a cop, and Macaulay, he's on the highway, he's home free, he's finished, but there's just one more thing. And he decides to go back and live his life as a criminal and end it.
Yeah. They don't get peace, and that's not because of outside forces, it's because of their own decisions. That's one thing I was thinking about in the movie, is like neither of these characters do we like you said, we never get to see either of them kick back or reflect for even a moment. The entire time, especially, and I felt it more with Vince because he just looks so tired all the time.
Yeah.
But the entire time I'm thinking, like, is this guy gonna get a break? I mean, like, we see him operating at all hours of the day. He's constantly going. He's constantly got giant bags under his eyes. And then the one scene where it looks like he's finally gonna get some, where he decides to go back to his hotel. He takes off his jacket. It's about to, go to sleep, and bam, he discovers the body of his daughter. And then he just has to keep going, and that leads to the finale. So the only rest is found in death. Yep. I'll say is sort of what Mann is saying, not necessarily as an overall message with this film, although he might be saying that, but it's definitely what he's saying for these characters, for these just kind of obsessed characters trapped in by their own passions and by their own desires to live a certain kind of life. There's no peace for them.
Yeah.
They keep going.
Yeah, and it makes the conclusion very interesting. It's very satisfying and very dissatisfying. It's very tragic.
Yeah.
It's also triumphant. You get that final shot of the two, Macaulay and Hannah, holding hands, understanding each other. This is, the end of their journey. And Macaulay dies doing what he loves. But it's beyond that trope. Because like I said earlier, he decides in this moment in time, what's more important to me than my life with Edie is my life as a criminal. He chooses completely. And it's tragic because he's dead, And the same thing with Vince and Hannah. He chooses the life of a cop. That's what he wants. He gets what he wants, but he does not get what he needs, a life as a father or a husband.
He doesn't get an actually healthy life. He gets the chance, but he throws it away. And he keeps throwing it away. That's part of what makes these characters interesting is, like, they have histories. You get more of Vince's history than you do of Neil's. But with Neil, it's clear he's been doing this for a long time. And Vince especially, I mean, he's on his third frickin' marriage,
Yeah.
Like, he keeps getting chances to find peace, to just chill out and, like, have a good life. But he keeps throwing it away because he's so obsessed with his job.
Yeah. The word that I used when I wrote it down was addicted, which was the exact language I found that Roger Ebert used in his review. And it's these guys, they are obsessed. This is a film about obsession, but they can't stop. They cannot. They try, but they cannot. There's that moment where, the gang regroups. They're all there together, with Val Kilmer and Mike's there, and they just pulled off a great score. They can relax. Like I said, De Niro already has a spot picked out in New Zealand, but hear about one more job, and they can't turn it down because they love it. Mike's line, "The action is the juice." They can't.
Yes. I want to think about the title for a moment and what that could potentially mean regarding the themes of the film. Heat. And what springs to mind is that one saying, which is John Voight's character, I believe, says it to Neil. What's the exact wording? If you see the heat coming, be out of there in 30 seconds. Or like he's basically saying, don't nail yourself down because trouble will come, heat will come, and you have to be prepared to get out of there.
De Niro's got that line, do not get attached to anything that you are not willing to walk out on in 30 seconds if you feel the heat around the corner.
Yes. But that's what's weird about that is that both characters try to sort of escape from that and to like, calm down and choose civil lives, to nail themselves down, basically, like De Niro saying not to do. And that's not what dooms them. At the very end, what dooms De Niro is he's about to nail himself down. He's about to get out. He's about to have a peaceful life. But no, he decides to turn around, turn that down, and face the music at the very end. So his own sort of mantra turned against him, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think of the diner scene. Great scene for many reasons. But it's this fantastic midpoint, which, is usually the point in a narrative where, the point of no return, it's often called. And these two...
Hang on, sorry, which scene? The diner scene you're saying?
Diner scene.
Oh, that's right, where they meet. Okay, sorry, continue.
Hannah and Macaulay, they see each other for the first time. They're aware of each other's existence, but now they're getting to know who each other are. And you've got essentially like these mob wives throughout the film. You've got Hannah's actual wife and De Niro's or Macaulay's girlfriend, and they're trying to like call them out of it. They're saying, like, get out of this life. It's not good for you. I want you. And these two get together. They're adversaries, but they are really the ones who convince each other to keep going. They're just like in this echo chamber where they each say, Hannah has that line. He's like, you ever think of living a regular type life? De Niro says, what's that? Barbecues and ball games? This regular type life, is that your life? He says, no. They both decide to each other, I can do nothing else. That's another line from that scene. They can't do anything else. They don't know any other life. And it's
absolutely.
That the adversaries, each other, are the ones drawing them in.
I think the film, the way it uses female characters in that regard is interesting. Mm-hmm. Because the woman in both relationships sort of represent, the good life, the home life, barbecues and ball games in a way. Yeah. And they are calling them into that good peaceful end, and they're both so obsessed that they refuse, That it's sort of an ancient story in some ways. It's kind of this archetype of, you've got the man and the woman just wants a peaceful home life, but the man is so obsessed with something that, he has to go to war, he has to go do this, has to go find that, et cetera, so he just can't settle down. It's something that you've seen in movies for decades upon decades, Yeah.
One thing I want to talk about is the setup throughout this film. This film is 2 hours and 50 minutes long, and it's very interesting. Every single scene is doing multiple things, which is exactly what you want in when you're writing. But one of the things that every scene is always doing is setting up another scene. Nothing comes out of nowhere. After the first 20 minutes of the film, there's nothing that happens that has not been set up. It's crazy. And one thing, just one example that I really love is Chris, Val Kilmer's character, the end of his arc. You have this conflict constantly raging, in his house between him and his wife. And they're cheating on each other, and, Val Kilmer is squandering all his money, losing it gambling, and, they can't stand each other, but they want each other. And it comes to this moment where the cops are at Chris's wife's house, and they're trying to convince her. They know Chris is going to come by, and they're trying to convince her to point him out. And he eventually does come by, and there's this moment where you have no idea which way it's gonna go. Earlier in the film, she wants to leave Chris earlier, and Macaulay says, "Give him one more chance, and then I will finance your separation." And she gives him one more chance, and he goes and robs a bank and gets shot, and it's over. And he comes back, and she gives him one more chance after that.
Yeah, and she straight up agrees with the cop. Okay, yes, I'll help you take this guy down. Reluctantly, of course, but she does agree to. But then at the very end, she saves him regardless.
Yeah, and it was very refreshing because there are many twists, quote unquote twists, that you see in films that are just like, I know what you're trying to convince me is going to happen, and I know it's not going to happen because they set it up that scene, And this is just one example of this was set up from the very first scene that you see this woman, and then every consecutive scene with her in it is setting up this, this question. You don't know what's going to happen in this final one.
When I was watching through it, and I hadn't seen it before, of course, a fair amount of the time I was thinking like, this pacing is kind of long. But then like as more and more scenes started to have payoffs, I realized like you couldn't shave 10 minutes off this movie and make it make sense.
You're right.
It is. And every scene, like you're saying, is necessary. Every scene is a setup. Occam's razor has been at work here, and you could not shave 1 millimeter lower. Otherwise, guess what, buddy? You're slicing into skin.
Yeah.
It's just perfect. And I think it's really interesting to look at that and the pacing because, every scene is necessary, but at the same time, the pacing doesn't feel frenetic, which is good because 2 hour and 40 long movie with the pace of like DreamWorks film would not be fun to watch. But like I was saying, it's got these almost art housey moments mixed in with like, powerful drama and tight choreographed gunfights.
Oh my gosh.
Where it just lets you breathe for a moment. Like, so you look out the city of LA, which I think Macaulay describes as like, a galaxy of infinite stars.
Yeah.
Or it allows you to just like, look at the grass blowing in the wind, or just, watch people going about their everyday business. It never holds it for too long. You never feel like you're watching like a Kubrick film or something.
Yeah.
But like it gives you enough space to breathe.
Yeah.
And I've found that is pretty much always a marker of great like action or thriller films, is giving you space to breathe between intense moments so that you can fully appreciate the intense moments themselves better. So you don't feel like you're being sensory overloaded, but so that like when one of those fantastic action scenes does come, you're on the absolute edge of your seat because you haven't been bombarded with action scenes before it.
Yeah. This is I keep saying this is a drama that is punctuated with some action moments. There are like 3 heists that happen in this film. There are, maybe up to 5 gunfights, and that probably encapsulates a quarter of the entire runtime, and so you do, but there are also not just these heights in terms of visceral excitement. There are these emotional heights or depths, and then you get, like you said, time to breathe. I think this moment came and went, and as soon as I saw this shot, I can say this is the most beautiful shot in the film, and it's that one after Macaulay is chasing Edie up the hill, and there's the grass blowing. It's setting the tone. You're calming down, and right after that, there's the shot of the city of lights out of focus, looking like the Milky Way. And it's this wide angle. Very few wide angles in the film, but there's a wide angle with a tree on the left side and Macaulay and Edie dwarfed on the right. And it looks great. And it's a moment to reflect and be like, there's so much tension going on. And these are people's lives. And you need a moment to just say, I want to think about what's happening take a breather.
Absolutely.
You're getting bombarded by lots of emotions throughout the film, and there's space to breathe. You're right.
Fantastic.
I think of the cinematography as well. Frenetic is a word you use that I also used in the very first note I took, talking about the videography and some of the editing. This film has shaped the way I think of videography more than probably any other film ever. And that's partially because of the dynamic camera throughout the entire runtime.
Unbelievable camera work.
I think of, it accelerates the film. Just these moments that could be static is just, it turns into this arc around a character or a pan or something that just adds movement. Your mind is watching something happening rather than just a static shot, as well as
absolutely
some tight edits, some very tight editing here. But I said it is not frenetic. It feels, the pacing of the film is still not lethargic, but slow. And the shots, you're not getting quick cuts, even in the action, but the camera moves, and it adds, like I said, it accelerates the pace. It adds movement without being craziness. I love it.
Unbelievable. It's just so good. Yeah, there were several camera moves throughout this film that really, really stuck out to me. One of them is that scene where Pacino's going to meet that guy to intimidate him and set up a meeting with his brother, right? I'm struggling to remember the guy's name at this point. Exactly, but he's marching in, he looks ticked off, he's ready for war, and the camera starts out with a close-up of his face, and it swings around his body, so you get kind of a look at the environment, and then it kind of passes behind him, and then it moves in on his face again right as he starts yelling at the guy.
Yeah.
And it's just perfect the way it gives you a sense of the scene while also keeping that kind of sense of urgency and tension that the scene demands, and that Vince as a character is expressing, because he's here to intimidate the guy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Again, and I think that's good directing at its very best. It's not just, that's a cool camera move. The camera move does 3 or 4 different things at once, and does them all perfectly and balances them all while still keeping the scene unified and still keeping the scene with its primary focus at the forefront.
Yeah. Michael Mann develops this visual language throughout with these movements, and yes, some of them are very very self-indulgent. I remember seeing that camera movement and just being like, oh my gosh, that is so fun to watch. And some of them are very minute. However, it's very interesting to see. This is kind of the inverse of the way that David Fincher shoots many of his films, where he shoots ultra wide angle, often very static cameras.
Yeah.
So then you get these moments in Fincher films where the camera moves. Anytime that there is a handheld shot, you are aware, and it is maybe the most intense moment of the film or something.
Oh yeah, I think The Social Network, and you haven't seen The Social Network, which is sad, but it's got only one handheld shot in the entire film, and that's right at the finale.
The exact same.
That is the climax. That is the climactic shot of the film is handheld.
All right. Yeah, exactly. And Michael Mann does the opposite here. The diner scene are just over the shoulder shot, reverse shot. And it is when the camera slows down and does nothing, you're aware. It's as if, you're sitting in a room and the AC is going and all of a sudden it shuts off and you realize there was sound and now there's silence. It's a very unique way to signal that change is happening, and very the best way. That's the best way this film could be handled.
Absolutely. And again, it's able to keep it snappy and interesting throughout the 2 hour and 15-minute runtime, because it does that, because it's got that sense of movement throughout. But periodically, again, it's got those moments of quiet where it just allows you to bam, focus on the plot. And considering what we were talking about earlier, the diner scene is such a climactic scene in terms of character development and in terms of performances, especially. It's very performance fueled. That it's almost a marker of, it's almost Michael Mann telling you this is important. Watch carefully. It may not seem important because it's two guys sitting down and drinking coffee, but this is a crucial turning point in the film.
Yeah. One question I have for you, to change the trajectory a bit. Throughout the film, I'm thinking of the fact that it's shown maybe most clearly in the diner scene. Two characters that are parallels. They're opposites, but they're virtually the same, At the end of the film, it gets to this point where it's a foot race or a foot chase, I should say. Hannah chasing Macaulay. And they each have firearms. One of them is going to shoot the other. Somebody is going to die. And they're so even. They have had the exact same character arcs. They're at the same position in their character arcs. There's no reason for one to live and the other to die, other than the fact that Neil Macaulay is a criminal.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, can you dredge up any other reason? Is there a moment in the film where you say, because of this, it's Macaulay instead of Hannah? Macaulay's arc is weaker than Hannah's for some reason or something like that. Can you find any reason, or is this just because he's a criminal?
That's a great question. So I want to backtrack a little bit on what I said earlier about De Niro's whole mantra, you got to get up and go in 30 seconds, etc. And how it's kind of the opposite of that leads to his downfall. Mm-hmm. I do think, in a way, his allowing himself to get attached to Edie did kind of put him in that position a little bit. It made him more vulnerable.
That's
and that comes out in a number of ways. It comes out in De Niro's performance, especially. But he becomes a more vulnerable and more developed character as a result of it, which is great. He wouldn't be nearly as interesting a character otherwise. But I'd say that's maybe it. He has a rule and he does not stick to it. And, well, that's definitely not the sole reason he got shot. I think that's what led to him sort of slowly falling in that direction. Yeah. Vince has no such rule that he's trying to stick to and that he is, falling with. And that's one difference between the characters, I'd say, is their character arcs happen in interesting ways because Vince is a machine, Mm-hmm. He's got one direction that he wants to move in, and he's moving in that direction. He's a cop. He catches the bad guys. He does that. It's obviously creating problems in other areas because his marriage sucks. But, he's doing what he wants to do. Neil starts out as a criminal who robs people. That's his shtick, that's his gig, that's what he does. But then he starts to move away from that. He starts to become a little more confused and to lose his identity a little more as the film goes on. So that's a little bit of a stretch, I guess, but it is kind of an interesting piece of character development. And I'd say, if anything, that's the reason why Neil died and Vince didn't.
I think you're right. And I think that's a great point to bring up. And
thank you.
I think that then I'm thinking now accelerates the both the element of the tragedy and the triumph. It makes me think of my all-time favorite film, No Country for Old Men.
Yes.
This is a concept that's more expanded in the novel, but the reason that Llewellyn Moss, spoilers, but the reason that Llewellyn Moss is killed is because he has his MO, which is just go. I'm not going to look back and then I won't get caught. Just be prepared. Yeah. In the film, he meets a woman and just doesn't do anything morally wrong or anything. He just slows down for a moment and then he's caught and killed. And I think this makes me think of what you brought up with Macaulay and the way, it's kind of like that philosophy. It's better to have loved and lost than to have never loved. He gets this taste of a life that, now that I think about it, I don't think we see Vince and Hannah really, really get a moment where, Macaulay gets to relax He gets to be with this girl. He's in love, you know. We never
Yeah.
really, aside from the opening, we really never see Hannah enjoying his marriage. And so, you know, as De Niro dies, that's the reason he dies, which makes it even more tragic. But he's lived more than Hannah. That's really interesting.
Yes. That's a fantastic point. And that brings back how, you know, in some ways, Vince is a worse person than Neil. You know? Like, I'm only now starting to think again about that opening scene and how Vince as a character is introduced. Like you said, that's sort of the only moment of peace he gets in the film. And it immediately just like devolves and turns into stress as what's the character's name? Natalie Portman comes upstairs and she starts freaking out about her barrettes.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah. And that pays off because it shows us, you know, this poor girl is mentally unstable. But like it's just, you know, he tries to get a moment to relax and then bam, conflict. You know? It comes out of there.
Yeah. It's interesting to note that this film, from the perspective of just this film, Hannah is relaxing until Macaulay goes, knocks over the truck, and creates conflict for him. It is Macaulay's fault that, however, Hannah loves it. This is the life he wants. That's very interesting.
You can practically see his face light up at times when like he gets some new lead on the case or when he first hears about the job. Like he's excited. He's in his element.
Mm-hmm. That made me think of one thing. One praise that I have for this film. I think there was only one, maybe two shots in the entire film where I remembered Al Pacino was short. There are many shots throughout the film where he's standing next to guys and he just looks like a regular dude.
Yeah.
We were talking about the finale, and that made me think one thing that I'm very curious to hear what you think of it. What do you think of the moment? It's almost a montage. The film does get frenetic here when Macaulay is shot. Can you think of that sequence in your head?
I'm trying. So it just kind of flashes back to some stuff, right?
Yes, lots of flashes, kind of goofy. Like Macaulay staggers very dramatically, and Pacino steps right up into a close-up and fires more, and it just cuts to like De Niro gasping and falling down, and then close-up on Pacino. Do you remember? Do you remember?
I think so. Yeah. Yeah. I think it worked well in my mind. It did kind of occur to me, you know, this looks a little fake maybe compared to the rest of the movie. But I like how it was overall. So I described it as like a movie-ish movie, you know, that kind of mixes realism and surrealism. Mm-hmm. Surrealism and the way it's periodically expressed in this movie is very interesting because I'd say the most surreal moments are character deaths or characters being wounded.
Yes.
In many ways, you know, and that's when human beings, while still on this earth, come kind of closest to the void, come closest to the dream state, you know. So like that's when, and you know, I've heard this about other movies. I saw it a little in Heat. But it seems like that's when Michael Mann brings out his most expressionistic film techniques.
Yes.
Is moments of violence. You know, when you've got a character being wounded, then they might, you know, slow-mo be dramatically thrown back or something. Might have that dramatic gasp, might have really intense lighting. And I think it works. I liked it. I liked the ending, you know. I thought it worked well for the tone.
You're absolutely correct about that impressionistic look. I use the word goofy, but I mean that in the best
It is a little goofy. I will agree.
That was one of my favorite moments in the film. I completely forgot that it was shot that way. And I'm remembering now the lighting is really weird, but I think it's done very intentionally. It looks like, you know, this Miami Vice type, you know, 70s, 80s, you know, cop TV show where the bad guy is caught and shot and justice is dealt. And it's very cheesy in a very self-indulgent way. I thought there weren't many moments like that throughout the film, but sometimes you did get glimpses of that. And I thought it was a very bold move and a very good one to make this decision to have more of this kind of, like you said, surreal, almost like a meta-narrative thematic climax during the narrative climax.
It's almost ironic in a way, is what you're saying. It's like expressed like, oh yeah, justice has been done, the day's been saved. But in reality, or in the reality of the plot, it's much more tragic than that, and both characters know it. I mean, one thing that's interesting about that is as soon as Neil like falls back, and as he's dying, you can see kind of this sadness on Vince's face, which you wouldn't expect from someone who's just brought down a dangerous criminal. Like he knew that Neil was a soul similar to himself, and he at one level it's just kind of sad that that the fun's over in a way, because he had so much fun tracking this guy down. But he's also sad that this guy's life has been ended, that this man has been killed, and by his hands, in a way that we haven't really seen. Hell, he looks more choked up over it than like over, I don't know, the near death of his daughter in some ways.
Yep.
Yep. He looks ruined. Very, very interesting.
Yeah. You brought up this concept of surrealism, and we mentioned earlier that this is a film that comes from other films. I wanted to talk briefly of this is definitely neo-noir. This is I've seen this on many neo-noir, top neo-noir film lists. And I mentioned the soft focus, LA. This is very reminiscent of many, many, many films. Too many to name, but it is very gorgeous to see the city shot like this with the soft focus and the lights. I just said I wouldn't mention any, but it makes me think of Taxi Driver. Taxi Driver is shot that way.
Yes.
Another classic neo-noir film. But the more ambiguity. There's very, very gray characters, to the point where if somebody asks you who's the hero here, the cop or the criminal, you can't say either. They are morally about even. I thought that was very interesting, and it's very cool. We both mentioned this, style and substance balance throughout the film, and that's where partially it comes into play for me. Seeing like these tropes of cinema that wouldn't mean anything to anyone who has never watched movies before, but they add some depth to it as well as just some fun, and it looks great.
Absolutely. I'm going to ask you kind of an odd question, and I want you to think about this.
Okay.
What do you think was your least favorite aspect of the film?
All right. Give me a moment.
I'm honestly having trouble coming up with one too, because this is a near perfect film.
Yeah.
But no film is perfect.
I think I might have one, and this is pretty nitpicky. So it's good job on Michael Mann that this is my least favorite thing, probably.
Yeah.
I think there's a very strong theme here. The parallelism between the two characters is really accentuated once we reach the midpoint, which is about halfway through the film. And the theme itself is very good, where there's this concept. It's very complex, of I was talking about the tragedy and the triumph simultaneously at the end. But this is not a very profound theme, I think on a thematic level, there could have been more added to this film. There's a concept that is extruded to its fullest extent, which is my favorite. I prefer that to many shallow concepts being looked at. But I think there was still some room for more. That'd probably be my least favorite aspect of the film. What do you?
Gotcha. Good answer. I do think the one scene where Pacino discovers Wayne Gro's victim is pretty weak, and I think not necessarily for the plot purposes. I do think it is sort of an effective way to make us hate Waingro, but I still don't know if it was all that necessary. I don't know. I feel like you could shave it out of the movie and it'd still be a great movie.
I absolutely agree.
And I think the girl's mother just kind of showing up and tearfully hugging Vince goes on a little too long and gets a little too weird.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, I get it. Waingro's a bad person, but like, do we really need 10 minutes of crying and hugging to express that? I don't know. It felt a little off kilter. Maybe I'll like it more on a rewatch, but I don't know. Didn't necessarily love that scene. That said, however, pretty much every other scene in the film, and this is quite the achievement for a movie this long.
Yes.
Pretty much every other scene felt necessary for the plot, and every other scene I enjoyed watching. I had a good time with it. It's just near perfect film throughout.
Yeah, I agree that that one scene could have been summed up. I guess it's two scenes, really. It could have been summed up with one short scene where you just see news footage or something, and then, you see Macaulay look up and see that it's Waingro who does it, and, maybe show his Nazi tattoos on the news or something. But
yeah,
I do agree that was a little unnecessary. You could argue that it adds something, but everything else, and like I said, this is a film that it chews on what it has. It takes time to develop, but everything that is developed is necessary. Beyond even, there are very few scenes that only develop something further and don't introduce anything new, which is astounding, like you said.
Yeah, I'm going to agree.
This brings me to, what is your favorite film, or what is your favorite scene in this film? I think it's opened with a great scene, ended with a great scene. There's the diner, there's the shootout, many Al Pacino lines. I want to hear what you think is your favorite.
Okay. I think my favorite scene is probably the big heist in the second half. And I think it's just a perfect set piece. I think the character development, like we were discussing earlier, as demonstrated through the action, is perfect for every character involved. De Niro's character, especially the way he acts in the scene, is very, very interesting. He's smooth, he's professional. The way he takes care of Chris is very cool. Mm-hmm. And Pacino too, the way we see, a little bit more of the darker side of his character as he opens fire on Mike, who's got that girl as a human shield, is fascinating. And just like, even stepping back from the plot development and character development, just what a great action scene.
Absolutely. I
mean, just the way you watch sort of this area of downtown LA, which is utterly gorgeous to look at, just kind of be torn apart by this and just see the panic happen. And the way you see like the gunfire and the smooth takes. I'm thinking about, you've got there's that one shot that I was thinking of, which is following Chris, right?
Yep.
And it like follows him. It's like one smooth camera movement as he's like hiding behind a car, and he like gets up, shoots in front of him, turns around, shoots behind him, and then like kneels down behind the car, reloads, gets up, shoots again. It's just perfect.
I absolutely agree.
It's amazing. I think, yeah, the sound design, like and it has so much impact. It feels like every gunshot just like echoes off the buildings around and lands at this sort of epic feel. That actually kind of reminds me. One thing that I've been thinking about this movie, I feel like there is a good case to call it an epic film. To say it is an epic. Like the way it develops the characters separately and then sort of slowly brings them together over the runtime and has them kind of collide off of each other and go separate ways only to re-interact again. All these characters set up in different ways, each with their own clear personalities and stuff. It reminds me of Lord of the Rings. Yes, it's weird. That's one thing I didn't expect. It's like, it's amazing. And that, above all else, was the aspect that made me decide, all right, this movie earns its runtime.
Yes.
This is why you could not make Heat shorter and have it be nearly as good.
Yes. I absolutely agree with your thoughts on that. That whole heist, that whole shootout is fantastic. I said earlier, I think it is the best shootout in cinema history, not just because that's what everybody else says, because I truly think that. There's something about the way that Michael Mann shot this. He's very meticulous. He got these guys to shoot on site. I mean, they blocked out this portion of downtown LA, and they had a fake gunfight. They even had them firing live rounds, so you can see there's one specific shot, or not live rounds. Did I say? I meant fake rounds. They are not firing live rounds. There's one specific
Alec
shot.
Baldwin moment.
I think of Chris with his, he's got that automatic rifle, and there's just the casings, the shells just flying out the side. There's something like visceral about that whole moment. I've seen a short documentary solely about this scene, and they have cameramen like shooting the documentary, watching the cameramen shoot the film, and I was astounded to see that it's just the film from a different angle. There's no CG in that portion at all. You're watching, they set up the small detonators on the sides of all the cars, so there would be bullet holes coming in the cars. You watch people get up and fire and get back down. It's insane. And the thing that in my mind accelerates this moment from any other, this gunfight than any other, is the sound design. Like you said, Michael Mann mentioned they shot it all and they went to a firing range to record the audio. And so, like I said, they were firing with fake rounds, but it makes the same sound. And they got to the firing range, and it just did not sound as good. And they went back to the audio, and just the way that, it echoed off all those, those tall buildings. And it was, I'm listening to this on a decent sound system, but it's the best thing it has ever worked to produce.
Absolutely gorgeous. Yeah, it's just amazing. So would you say that this is also your favorite scene? Or what would you say is your favorite scene?
I would say on first watch, that was my favorite scene. And I'm trying hard, but there is actually a scene that you mentioned earlier, when Pacino goes to interrogate that one guy he's a rat, he's an informant, and you were talking about that great camera movement. But this is like Pacino's first bam, great exclamation point performance in the film.
He's really hamming it up, and it's awesome.
Oh my gosh, he goes so crazy in that scene, and Pacino is 90% of the reason I like that scene. The other guy is the other reason. He's got great lines. Pacino's sidekick is just like, we know you got drugs on you. He's like, come on, man, have some sympathy. It's substance abuse, Great lines. Pacino,
it's great comedic timing too.
Right.
Yeah.
Throughout the film, Al Pacino is known for his improvisation. In that scene, he literally begins singing his lines. Something about, when the sun comes up in Phoenix, he'll be gone. He asks, he says, oh, your brother, is he here now? And he looks under the table. He's so crazy in that scene. That's my favorite. That's probably my favorite scene in the film.
Great scene. Well, hey, absolutely love this movie. Thank you so much for introducing me to it, and I am on my way to watch more Michael Mann films.
I'm so glad you love this film. Like I said, this is in my top 5. I love sharing my favorite movies.
All right, I think that's about all the time we have for this episode. Thank you all so much for watching. Please feel free to tune in next week when we will be discussing Shaun of the Dead from, I believe, 2004, directed by Edgar Wright. If you're interested in that much commitment and you haven't seen it before, go watch it before next week. Great movie. Really, really funny. Really creative throughout. We're on Twitter, Armchair Critics Podcast. Our tag is @CriticsArmchair because apparently Armchair Critics was taken. Feel free to DM us if you have feedback, movie suggestions, that kind of stuff, or send us an email at armchaircriticspodcast@gmail.com. Thank you again so much for listening, and we appreciate it. Y'all have a great day.